Howdy.
Howdy. How's it going?
We're back. It's going good, Dan. How are you?
I've been pretty well. Spending a little bit of time on social media these days. Been noticing some weird trends here and there. A little bit of a
Oh,
sideshow,
really?
maybe.
Oh, are you trying to tee me up to go on a rant? Is that
Trying to
what you're trying
lob
to
you a softball.
do? Yeah. Well, Dan and I were just talking offline before we started that the internet is kind of or social media is kind of turning into a sideshow. Like if you if you remember in the 1830s, back maybe when you were young, maybe you remember that there used to be like these sideshows, right? And like there would be the bearded lady, there'd be the world's strongest man, there'd be the person who can like tie themselves into a pretzel, there's all these like crazy things, and you would pay to go like see these people. In this case, like we're seeing stuff on TikTok and whatnot of people doing outrageous things. Like this new trend that we were seeing is people who like pretend like they're non-playable characters or NPCs, and they're just like, hello, hello, like they're being all weird and robotic. They're sitting there 6 hours a day. Dan, there's one person, she makes like 50 grand a day doing this stuff.
Blows me away. I don't understand. But it's the thing that's interesting to me is if you're on there for other growth reasons. Let's say that you don't want to necessarily be on camera, dressed up like some sort of I don't know what. But let's say that you don't want to go that direction. Instead, you're on here, I don't know, trying to build an audience for, let's say, your business, God forbid. How do you compete for attention when you have something really outlandish, really kind of crazy there, and then you have something where you want to talk a little bit more about, I don't know, features and benefits?
Yeah. You have somebody who's like dressed as a cow, like juggling sausages, and then the very next video is like, let me tell you how you can grow your B2B SaaS company. It's like, how are you ever gonna get anywhere? That's a really funny visual. Yeah, it's tough, man. Yeah, it's very tough to compete. And that's why I think that there, a lot of folks in marketing that I've talked to, they talk about the intent somebody has while they're on that platform, right? And some platforms are a little bit more wired for people who are like relaxing. And doesn't mean you can't convert there. It's just the conversions are different. And at the end of the day, it's your cost per lead, right? Like that's really all that matters. How much are you paying for somebody to take the action that you're hoping for them to take? And maybe the answer is the less entertaining you are, the more expensive it is going to be.
I think I told you about this book, Hook Point, last year. I picked it up, and it was a refreshing read because it was one of the first times that I heard a professional advertiser at a very high level talk about the emotions that they were trying to create in people with short form content. And he his name's Brendan Kane, and he's also got a book called Million Followers in 30 Days or something, which is another little challenge that he did successfully. But it was interesting because he talked about some videos, some YouTube videos specifically, that I didn't realize were his agency's production. And there was one. Do you remember the John Cena stuff where John Cena would burst out of there'd be some kid talking about how he'd want to meet John Cena, or like how John Cena is his favorite wrestler, and then John Cena would burst out, and it was all eventually an ad for like Cricket Mobile, Cricket Wireless, whatever it's called, right. Something like that. Do you remember these ads at all?
Yeah, of course.
So that was his agency, and he was basically saying, and I remember like thinking back, it stuck. We both know what we're talking about here for the past, what he was talking about, a couple of years ago. And it was interesting hearing him talk about how intentional it was that making people want to cry, to have a little bit of an emotional moment like that is, it's the same thing behind why people watch America's Got Talent. Those early stage auditions is what everybody shows up for. Nobody, I think, the large majority only just want to see the auditions where that person gets their shot, against all odds. And so what is the emotion you're going for on social? I think especially with short form, and for business owners, I think that sometimes it could feel a little bit more, let's say, boring than compared to the cow juggling sausages. But there's still something there, though. If you're struggling with something in your business and you're really, I don't know, you're worried about the survival of your company. Well, can you speak to that? Do you have something else that is, the person actually cares about to that level where they want to laugh about it, they want to cry about it, they want to get mad about it, they want to get, right. What is the emotion you're trying to elicit? And yeah, I just think it's a lot more intentional than most people than I've ever sort of realized before, which is odd because I've been in the industry for so long.
Yeah, this is a really great topic. When I did comedy, one of the things, and for those of you who don't know, I did stand up comedy for about 5 years, if like officially 5 years, but I did a little on and off after that. But anyway, so I did stand up for about 5 years. And one of the things that you learn really, really early on is that how fast you can get the audience to understand your perspective, the better your jokes are going to be. It's not necessarily the joke, and I can prove this to you. If you've watched, let's do Dave Chappelle's most recent stand-up special. Great example. I want you to watch that stand-up special, especially if you found it funny. I want you to watch it and just pretend like you don't know who Dave Chappelle is. All of a sudden, it's not really that funny anymore. And you can do this with a lot of comedians. There's a few that break this mold, and Louis C.K. is one where he's just objectively hilarious, and it just compounds because you understand his perspective on the world and how he thinks. But most famous comedians, the quality of their jokes, if you were just to take a step back, decrease with few exception. But they're still really popular. People still find them very funny. You even find them funny, even though technically the quality of their jokes are decreasing. It's because we already understand this perspective. So when you don't have that as a young comic or an early comic, what do? Well, you try to do your best to get the person to understand your perspective as quickly as possible. So then that way there's less of a burden on actually having like really, really good jokes. Obviously, the goal is to have as good of jokes as possible. And I'm sure there's some comedians who probably disagree with that. But, you can't have one without the other, but the faster you're able to get somebody to understand your perspective, the more that they relate to you and more that they understand you at least, which makes a lot of the other things you say funnier or it resonates more. I think the same thing somewhat applies when we're creating content. Like for me, for a long time, I've always created pieces of content in a vacuum. And I actually think that's a mistake. I think people track your collection of work
Yep.
a lot better than I definitely have given him credit for in the past.
Yeah, I think that the comedy is a great example. Like as you were saying that you're talking about brand sort of there too. Like
Totally.
what are you building? And just on the comedy level, there was that recent interview with Zach Galifianakis and Jerry Seinfeld, and Seinfeld was basically saying it's a blessing that Galifianakis is just perceived as being hilarious just by showing up. He was talking about how it's a curse for him because he can't go anywhere. He was at a funeral or a wedding or something, and people were laughing because they assumed that he was making a joke while he was really just crying because he was at his sister's wedding. So I mean, there's stuff like that but Seinfeld was saying like that's a blessing. There's only a few people who can just by being themselves the audience perceives them as hilarious. So he could say anything on stage and people would be cracking up, which is interesting. And I think remember Bernie Mac? Remember that the Def Jam where a comedy special where he was coming up after the guy who just got booed off stage, and the crowd was going nuts, and it was not a nice atmosphere to be in. And he grabs the mic, and he's probably 20 years old at the time. He goes, "I ain't scared of you, whatever." And then and he stops basically before calling them MFers, and the whole crowd just in one instant, boom, is on his side because they know who he is, know his perspective, and just jump on. From a business side, if you think about the guy who does it very well these days, I think in short form content, it's probably Alex Hormozy. We know his stuff from the book, from the long form content, and then when he sits down with a one point to make about, I don't know, business theory of some sort, we know he's going to deliver some sort of simple idea or a complex idea in a simple format. And you know what's up. So he also has a big person. I mean, he's ridiculous, and he used to have the handlebar mustache and everything. It doesn't help to be visually engaging as well,
Yeah, it totally helps. But the thing I think that's also part of this is you've pieced together Alex Hermozy's origin story from multiple pieces of content that you've watched, some of it short form, some of it longer form. So then you really start to understand the person. I think that matters if you're creating content online, whether you're an individual doing it as a personal brand or you're doing it for your business. I definitely think that matters, but ultimately it's how do you stand out? Right? Like that's really what we're all trying to do. And this applies in the sales process too. The salespeople that are standing out are the ones that are the most effective right now. We've had I was just talking to some founders earlier today, and one of the things that I brought up is that the former economic conditions when things felt like they were going really well, it was hiding a lot of bad sales practices. The tides were up, right? What's that common phrase? Like, let's see where everyone's at when the tides go down. I don't know the phrase, but do you know that phrase? What I'm talking about?
Rising tide lifts all ships.
No, there's another
But
one like, when the tides go away. I don't know, whatever. You see
I get
everyone's
the
bad
idea, though.
stuff when the tides
Yeah.
go away because now like you're seeing more of like the jagged rocks or whatever. Anyway, my point is the economy got really difficult, and all of these organizations got exposed because their retention dropped and their customer acquisition costs stayed the same, or actually they technically went up. Their spend on sales and marketing stayed the same for a lot of them, but their customer acquisition costs went up because they started getting less deals for the same amount of work, and they were caught with the tide down. And that's a huge problem for a lot of organizations. And now they got to really sit back and think, gosh, how do I create a resilient sales process that doesn't get me in this type of situation ever again? I think standing out's a big way to do that. Like your sales reps should be encouraged and should have the resources and the enablement to be able to have effective conversations with prospects, but also operate in a way that really sets them apart from other salespeople that work at your competitors. So something I think worth thinking about.
Well, I think we talk a lot about sort of using data and real market data to actually get real feedback from what's happening in the world to sort of look back at your own stuff, your own messaging, your own process in general, and sort of make better decisions that way. And I think it's actually pretty relevant here, where you can think about. I think one of the most dangerous things is basically success during a bull run, because you don't know why the success really happened if
Exactly.
you're just lazy about it, basically, if you're not testing, if you're not really critically challenging your stuff. So for example, the crypto run, right, a couple of years ago, the current AI revolution, which I truly believe in both cases were revolutions, were huge deals. But when you piggyback off of a movement, you might get some good, quick results from it. But if you're just throwing in AI to everything, or you're just saying, "Oh, we're crypto," during the crypto run, okay, yeah, sure, you might get some benefits off of that. But once the thing crashes, or once the thing at least comes back down to some sort of mean, or of some sort, then if you're still just saying, "Well, but we have an AI tool, it's also AI," well, that's not going to matter to a lot of people in 6 months, unless the functionality is really there, unless the real proof of what people actually want is really, really directly there, because everybody's claiming AI now. I mean, literally
Right.
every company that we know is now has some sort of AI function, or we're also an AI company. That's going to go away. It certainly happened in crypto, and people were sort of left, kind of shocked that their customers are running away with, and they don't understand why. It's
Yeah.
so important to really, really challenge your wins as much as you challenge or investigate your wins as much as you investigate your losses, and sort of say, like, wait, why didn't this email work? Why did this email work? What are the educated guesses here? And I feel like a lot of people never touch their wins. They just go, oh, it's a win. Let's not look at it anymore. Let's just look at the weak stuff. And I think looking at your strongest stuff critically is super important, especially on speaking of social and short form. You should be definitely doubling down on those videos that went viral, for example, on TikTok. Why did that video go viral? Looking at the one that didn't work, it's actually, I think, less relevant than the ones that did, and really sort of backwards testing and reverse engineering, I guess, the things that seem to be working in your industry. I see a lot of brand pages on LinkedIn right now not doing that, and I sort of wish that they would, because they're just sort of throwing random content out with no thought.
Yeah, well, it's easier to look at something that didn't work well and just say like, "Oh, I'm going to stop doing that because it didn't work." It's very obvious. It's like, I did it, it didn't work. Let's not do that again. You look at it, you're like, okay, make sure I don't do that thing. It's really difficult to figure out why something worked. So because of that friction of like having to figure out why something works, sometimes you just don't have the information to figure it out, and you need to make sure you do for the next time you run a campaign or do something. But if you sit down, you really try to figure out, hey, why did this campaign work, or why did this piece of content, why was it effective? You're right. You will learn some very interesting things, and then you can start to repeat them. And that's the key. So, like, to bring this to sales specifically, I know we were talking about content a lot, but we see this with sales teams all the time, where you have an organization that has a sales team, things are going well, and then what happens? their top sales rep leaves the company, and then all of a sudden everything just shatters. They didn't have like a real process. They didn't know why that one person was effective and the other reps were struggling. They didn't know what was going on within the team that allowed everybody to do a little bit better because we had one person who was actually paving the way at a, you know, at a higher level. And the next thing you know, you blink and it's been 8 months since that person left. Things are challenging. And then the sales team is saying, hey, we need to lower the quota that they used to hit when that person was there. Now, could market conditions affect that? Of course, right? Situations always matter. Well, my point is, though, is while things are going well, which is really your point, while things are going well, look at what you're doing and figure out why those things are working. So then you can take that, put it into a system, put it into a process, and then give it to other people. And let me give one quick example of this that is very, very recent. I have a friend of mine. He's a sales rep. He's really, really good at texting with prospects when they're in the sales cycle. He's incredible at it. In fact, I've never seen a sales rep better at it. He's always texting his prospects, and he'll go and reactivate past deals over text all the time. So I asked him, I sat down with him for 15 minutes. I'm like, dude, just walk me through how you do this. How do you get people to text you? You know, how do you get the permission? How do you engage them in conversation? And like, it took probably like 5 rounds of deeper questioning until he finally like it clicked for him that he was following a process. He just didn't know what the process was. So then I sort of extracted that, and now I'm building it into a framework. He didn't even know. He was just like doing it because it's kind of natural to him. And he just thought like, oh, it just depends, blah, 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 blah. No. There's a process there. You just need to keep digging, and then you'll be able to extract it.
Look, first of all, and I know you're talking about, and he is really, really good at that. But yeah. The angle that I think there's 2 things here. Number one, people who say that those who can't teach. I've said this before. Total BS. Because if you're able to teach the thing that you're good at, it means you've thought through the process well enough to really break it down into a repeatable framework for other people. I think that is such an important thing to understand. What am I good at, and then how can I then break it down and think about it in a way that's so clear that I can pass it on to other people. So important, I think, for anybody who wants to go anywhere in their career in general, I think, and this applies to a entry-level sales rep who starts to understand that they have some sort of skill. Well, explore that more and sort of develop it into something, claim something. But I think that on the note that on both, I guess, brand identity and personal brand and all that kind of stuff, which is a dicey topic sometimes. But you introduced me to a sheet that you use that I thought was really good. I really love this sheet. It's the rep superpower sheet. You know what I'm talking about?
The rep. Oh yeah. This is great tool.
It's from my understanding, quick summary here is basically it's a tool that a sales leader, sales manager can look at their team with, and sort of, if you list, Sarah, Jim, Frank, whatever, their names down, and then you sort of build out what is each rep's superpower. What is their specialty? For example, this person might be very good on video. This person might be very good at texting. This person might be very good, for some reason, their emails outperform everybody else's. Okay, great. Let's assign that superpower to that person, understand that they're very good at that, and then let's help that person explore why are they good at that. Let's tease out that process. Let's tease out what are they doing differently? What's working? Can we make some educated guesses? And I think that's a super important point from a leadership perspective, because expecting somebody to just build their own frameworks out of nothing for no reason doesn't make any sense. But if you can tease out what your team's already doing, you have some gold just lying around waiting to be picked up that with a little bit of work, those 5 rounds of questions that you had to do with our friend, right? That process, I feel like a lot of leaders don't realize is right there in front of them, waiting to be discovered. I remember with a couple of clients, especially there was one client where I don't know if you remember our friend Marie, but she was so good on video. She's an outlier, and when I looked at her videos versus everybody else's videos, you could quickly see why. It was because she had a slightly better background, just tiny bit, slightly better camera quality, just a little bit. But the big trigger versus everybody else was how much she was smiling, how warm she felt, how positive and energetic, with nobody else in the room, just her and the camera, just like that, smiling big. It was next level. When I lined up everybody's videos versus hers, just night and day. And right there, we can immediately lift the team's performance by saying, okay, this isn't even my idea, but let's look at Marie's stuff over here and just say, could everybody do a little bit more of this one thing that she's doing? and elevate performance up to her level. I think we have so many opportunities to do that with so many talented people on our teams.
Oh, totally, totally. And energy is a really big lever to pull. I mean, I often do this exercise with folks. If you need me to prove to you that how you use your body has a direct impact on how you sound, all you have to do is this. Think of what you would look like if you were the most depressed ever. You'd be hunched over, you'd be sad, you'd be frowning, your face would be all sad, right? And then go and do that and try to speak in a happy tone at the same time while you're being all sad and weird with your body. You can't do it. It's not physically possible. All of a sudden, you're like, wait a minute, I can't sound happy while looking and behaving sad. Why is that? Because it just isn't possible. You got to look happy. You got to be excited. You have to have good posture. You have to smile when you're talking. Like these things are so important, or at least for getting your tone to communicate what
Yeah, totally.
the emotion you're trying to communicate. It's really important. So anyway, I can't stress enough the importance of all of these. Like, I mean, call them intangibles, but I think they're like very tangible because you can learn it. You sometimes just need to put yourself in that state or that environment.
You can learn it and you can hack it too. That's the other thing. It's like I mean, the little triggers, like I totally, I'm stealing your stuff on the physical side, but what I've noticed in the last couple of years, since actually working with you, is getting writers to do this more often, or people when they're writing to do more of the physical stuff. It carries over immensely into the tonality of your language. Of course, it's much more powerful, I think, when it's actually spoken, when I can see you on camera, when there's a little bit of body language, when there's a little bit of facial cues and whatnot. But I actually posted about this on LinkedIn recently, but the idea that you can cheat in person, because I have so many things that I can do with you, a little pat on the back, little good handshake. That there's little things like that physically that I can do with you in person. At least on Zoom, I can still see you. We can see each other. But even that's a little bit off because I'm looking at camera right now, and then your face is slightly over here, and now I'm not making eye contact. There's little stuff like that happens. But when you're writing, people, I think that tone sort of disappears, and then they get weird and they sort of say, well, I'll throw in a joke and it's never funny. Why is that? And the quickest way to get better at your writing is not to think of a joke and then put robotically copy paste it into your email, but to just stand up, shoulders back, talk to the computer loud, get all pumped up, just go do the artificial stuff to pump yourself up a little bit. And you'll notice that your writing takes a massive positive spin immediately without you doing with jokes or thinking about stuff, just getting physical. I've even noticed this where I started doing this about 5 years ago, but I put on my headphones and I have Otter.ai, the app on my phone, and I'll go out, and if I'm feeling stuck, especially in a rut with my copy, or even my kind of stupid fiction stuff, but I will go out for a walk and I will just talk it out loud. And I'm in nature, I'm in a good mood, I like being on a little mini hike. The tonality of your ideas takes a step up without you even realizing. Sometimes it's very, very powerful.
Oh, totally, totally. Any hacks like that you can use. Like one of mine that I've been doing for a few months now is one of the things I like to do is swim. And it's because I have a torn ACL and meniscus. That's why I'm forced to swim. In reality, I don't love it all that much. It reminds me of high school when I was on swim and I played water polo and stuff. So just reminds me of all that. It's kind of like, ugh. But anyway, I can't run. So I'm in the pool. But one of the things that I didn't expect that was an outcome of swimming is you can't listen to music or podcasts or anything because you're in the water. Turns out to swim you have to be in the water. But because of that, you're forced to just not have anything playing and you're just there with your thoughts, which at first is real strange. You're like, whoa, I don't know, maybe you think to yourself, think by yourself more often than I do, but for me I was like, geez, what are these? I'm used to you racing by and right now you're kind of staying put. But anyway, so while I swim, I start thinking of ideas. And sometimes they're creative, sometimes they're just not creative and stupid, but all these ideas start coming. So what I started doing was going into the pool with a problem that I wanted to solve. So I'll think, okay, I need to create a process for X, or I need a solution to Y. And I'll hop in the pool with that thought in mind. I'll swim and I'll just keep thinking on it. And at first, it's no different than if I'm at my desk, and just thinking about it, just very basic. nothing really all that great. But as I keep going through the motions, all of a sudden it's like, oh, idea. Oh, could be structured this way. And plenty of times I'll hop out of the pool and I end up taking notes and writing down what I came up with so I can go either build it or I'll like call Dan and be like, hey, I got a great idea in the pool, right? That kind of
I
stuff.
was going to
It's
say,
much fun.
I know exactly when that's happening from literally the energy in your voice. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but it's very true. I know it's been a post pool idea, and they are usually very, very, very strong. It's like I don't think we have space to do a lot of this in regular life unless we make time for it in some sort of artificial capacity. And I think Dan Martell's book, Buy Back Your
Buy back
Time,
your time.
that set off a bunch of stuff I think for both of us in terms of trying to time block better, trying to be a little bit more intentional with our time. And then you introduced me to the idea of these non-negotiables a couple months ago, and one of them for me has been reading 10 pages a day, and which is crazy because I used to be a voracious reader. I mean, for all my life. And I've noticed in the past couple of years, I've pulled back from long form reading quite a bit, and it's kind of scary. Where sometimes I'll go back to fiction a little bit especially when I'm stressed out. But for the most part, I don't read as much as I like to. And just in the past couple of months, being able to sit down in the mornings, especially with 10 pages, consider it, call it a chapter, call it whatever, but with something that I've been meaning to read or something that I enjoyed reading in the past and go back to, and I have my notes next to me. And this is the first time that I've done this probably since grad school. Like, I mean, it's been more than 10 years. And to sit down and be able to just calmly take some notes before all the chaos, that comes up from the day and all the stuff that we have to stress out about, and just focus on one little concept that this, like for me, I've been going through Breakthrough Advertising again, one of my favorite books, Eugene Schwartz, and you always get new stuff out of books like that. And I haven't been able to go back to it. So anyway, it's just one little concept that for me has been hugely helpful. It's almost like a little bit of a meditative practice. Even if you don't get some great nugget that you turn into work right away, it feels good. It feels a little bit therapeutic almost.
Well, because you're making progress, and
Yeah.
is 10 pages a lot? Maybe not, but it's better than zero. But sometimes I feel like we think we need to go all in on something in order for it to be productive. I do the same thing. I have the 10 page a day rule, and I'm a slow reader. So 10 pages actually takes me a decent amount of time. But anyway, so I'll read through the 10 pages, and then a couple of weeks go by, like you're not even really thinking about it. You realize like, oh, I'm almost done with this book, and there's times I go through phases where I read all the time, and then there's times where I don't read. And this has been really nice because there's consistency there, and I feel like I make a lot more progress.
Well, we were just talking about all the social content and whatnot, but I come across this question every couple of weeks from folks in the community where basically the question is, what should I be posting? So what should I do? Or I don't know what to post. And that is automatically to me a sign that you're not taking stuff in. Because if you're taking stuff in, you're going to have opinions about it. So there's going to be, your human brain is going to be spinning ideas around in your head about whatever you've been thinking about, whatever you've been consuming. And the more that you can consume good stuff, the more you can produce probably interesting ideas where you take, A plus B equals X, and you come up with some cool stuff. I know that for me, whenever I get into, what was that book I was reading recently? The Phenomenon, the Phenom, the story about Rick Ankiel, the guy who basically got the yips as a pitcher, and then ruined his career essentially, and a couple years later reinvented himself not as a pitcher but as a home run hitter, and made it all the way back up into the majors, which is just it's a crazy story. But anyway, that story plus all, I had personal stories about my career that suddenly I started seeing little things come up. I was like, oh, that is interesting. When you start to, that little example is just the mindset flip of taking one of your big losses, your disasters in life, and turning it into a strength. Well, I have one of those stories, and I it's empowering to think of. Anyway, so little things like that, it's triggering in a very good way for your creative process. And I feel like if most of us are too busy with kind of BS, the little kind of silly things on TikTok, the silly things on Instagram that just don't have much depth, your ideas will suffer, your content will suffer. But if you're taking in good stuff, I think that's the difference between the content creators who I know who really produce amazing work versus the ones who are just kind of going through the motions on the hamster wheel. One is reading and watching very, very useful material. The other isn't.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Also, people who have a little bit more freedom, like they're not as worried about what other people are going to think about what they read.
Oh, yeah.
Those people do like really well. I like struggle with that big time, or I used to struggle with
Me
it a
too.
lot more, especially now. Where it's just like, oh, I don't want to get a negative comment or stuff, and now I just like ignore it. The amount of times, dude, we talked about this the other day. I'll bring it up here too. But I heard a really good quote by Gary Vee that like really resonated with me. And the quote from Gary Vee was, creators need to remember that the algorithm is for the consumer, not for them. And if you look at people complain on LinkedIn, which is infinite, what they're doing is they're complaining about the algorithm, like, oh, the algorithm is no longer showing my stuff to people. It's like, maybe, but also like maybe the people don't really like that content all that much. And that's why people aren't really seeing it. Like LinkedIn updated their algorithm and then the creators sort of freaked out. And it's like, well, really what LinkedIn's trying to do is deliver better content to the person who's reading it. Maybe they made a mistake and they need to reverse it. Doubt it. Odds are it's a better algorithm for the consumer. So that really started getting my opinion to shift. And now I focus a lot more on volume of posting, just output. Let me just write. And when you're forced to do output, or when you force yourself, right? No one has a gun to my head. But when you force yourself to do like higher output, which for me is I'm posting on LinkedIn twice a day now, which is way more, including weekends, way more than I was doing before. I was doing like 3 to 5 a week. But when you push yourself and like really say, I have to do 2 posts per day, the bar that you hold yourself to becomes way lower, and it ends up becoming what you write ends up becoming a lot more raw. And it turns out people respond better to the raw content than they do your packaged up. Because like sometimes you get in your head, you're like, okay, well, somebody could argue this, so I want to make sure I say this, so they don't think I mean this, and then you end up writing a thing that nobody like wants to respond to because you're like, you've like constructed this little like insulated wall that nobody can really penetrate. When like my opinions on that have kind of changed. Like I want people to penetrate the wall because it creates good discussion. And a lot of times people will say stuff that I even agree with. And I think that's helpful and it adds to the engagement in a positive way.
I totally agree. And there's a funny thing there too with the creative process. And I originally heard this from our friend Neville, but I just was recently listening to some screenwriter's story about his best class, from his best screenwriting teacher or whatever. And the idea was that the person, the professor forced the class to sit down and basically write out something like 300 ideas a day. And it was something ridiculous. It was a crazy amount of stuff. And they would do that. And over the course of the semester, what happened was that at the beginning, the first third of the semester, everybody was kind of describing the same kind of premise, like generally speaking, the same kind of, repeated patterns amongst everybody would come up. Then in quarter number 2, that's where stuff started getting into, or I guess the second third of the semester, it started getting a little bit more interesting, a little bit more, more creative. But then by trimester number 3, whatever it is, people really started having incredible ideas. Their own voices started coming out. And the example with Neville was, he always taught us to basically write, 25 subject lines, because the first 10 are going to suck. The next 10 are going to become interesting. And then the next 10 are really where creation starts to, happen, because you're stretching your brain to really come up with new stuff. And your best stuff is probably either going to be in the first 10 or the last 10, interestingly. But anyway, I think the quantity play is an interesting one. That's why I'm piggybacking off of your quantity push with my own. And I can tell you that first batch feels like garbage, because you're just brain vomiting your stuff onto paper. And then once you start getting into the flow, which I can feel it started to happen in the last week or so, where it's like, oh, this is easier to now do, but also the ideas are becoming a little bit more creative, and I'm taking notes better as I'm thinking throughout the day. So all sorts of reasons why I think that's a good move for many people to just, even if you don't care about LinkedIn or growing your audience or all that kind of stuff, if you just want to have better ideas, better angles, better creation for yourself, your business, you should be doing it in a journal. You should be doing it privately. I think publicly is better, but it's definitely one way to just don't just keep the thoughts in here, basically, because they're never going to go anywhere. They're never going to develop if it's just in your head.
Well, there's no quality without quantity. I'll go back to stand-up comedy for this because I think it's a great example.
Great,
Every
great example.
time a comedian has to say a joke and make tweaks to that joke before it is the form that makes it on their special, it's bananas. And you know how many jokes they wrote that just never worked? Go listen to interviews of like the greats. Go listen to an interview of Louis C.K. He talks about this all the time. He's like, yeah, I've tried to make this one joke work for decades. And like, I finally cracked it. Like I had one premise and like no one would ever laugh at the premise. And then I finally figured it out. You know how many times that guy needs to say the basic same bones of a joke over and over and over again? Like it just doesn't exist. But for some reason we feel like we have to be perfect on everything we write on LinkedIn. The stuff disappears. And if it sucks, no one reads it. Like I used to feel really self-conscious if I wrote something that nobody read. But now it's actually like I kind of have the opposite. It's like, yeah, it just wasn't like it wasn't good, so nobody read it. Not a big deal. Like I don't even look at it, to be honest. I don't look at any of my engagement numbers. If something pops off, I do because it's doing really well and I want to learn from it. Actually, maybe this is a good callback to what you were talking about earlier. But like I don't even look at the ones that didn't do well. I'll end up writing a post similar to it at some point. Maybe that one will do better. Like I'm not really worried about it. You know, I'm just trying to get as much stuff out there. And hopefully over time, the percentage of stuff that is good starts growing and the percentage of stuff that's bad starts decreasing. And then like I'm in a place where most of my content is good, but I don't think that comes without doing a lot of it.
Yeah, I think that's what was the example? I forget who shared this, but the if you think about the body of work of any great band, just music band, the Beatles. I think the example that I heard was the Red Hot Chili Peppers. What was you're listening to? You think they're amazing, they're incredible. There's probably 10 great songs that they've made that you really love that you would listen to on repeat on maybe 10, if that. And you're listening to 10 out of how many hundreds of songs that were published, which were an outcome of how many thousands of hours, in jam sessions and messing around with ideas, and how many, probably millions of hours after that. You're listening to a very, very small percentage of what the person actually created, but you're listening to something where there was a massive output. And it's very rare where you have the one-hit wonders. There's a reason why they're the one-hit wonders usually.
Okay, I got some cool facts. I want to double click into that because that's such a good point. All right. During their 8 years as a band, by the way, I'm not an expert on the Beatles. I'm reading the first thing that popped up on Google. During their 8 years as a band, the Beatles had 20 number one hits, which is nuts, and 34 top 10 hits on the Billboard chart. The Beatles have 213 songs.
Yeah.
Only 34 broke
10%.
the top 10. Now, they are, I'm actually, again, not a Beatles expert, but I'm pretty sure they're as far as win rate, it's like a sales term, their win rate of getting into the Billboard top 100 is probably higher than a lot of other things. I think I've heard that before, that they're one of the most popular, the highest percentage of their songs made it to the top, whatever. But still, like, let's just see, if you're saying top 10, 34, I mean, 15% of their songs ended up actually getting really, really popular. Dude, I can probably name a couple of them. I don't know a lot of Beatles songs, but I can only name probably a couple. Like what is that, Big Yellow Submarine? That song sucks. That song's terrible, right? But we all know we all live in a yellow submarine. Like, what a shit song. But I know the song, and then what is that? There's Strawberry Fields. I think that song's actually kind of good. I don't know. Whatever. You get my point.
I do. That's funny, but it's also, I think it's interesting, like the going back to something earlier about the rep superpowers. When a fresh-faced 21-year-old rep is posting, how-to articles on LinkedIn about how to become a great sales rep, of course we're all going to roll our eyes and kind of go, "Oh, this person doesn't really know what they're talking about. So what's really the content?" But if you have something that you're good at, and you sort of have an area that you're interested in, or you're naturally drawn towards being on camera, for example, you're naturally drawn towards something else. Maybe it's the writing for you if you're a copywriter or something. But if you can go down that road a little bit and develop your own ideas and publish them in teachable frameworks, in sort of packaged ideas, most are going to suck still, but some might catch. And I think that is the most interesting time where you can sort of look at what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and say, well, what if I did this a little bit, to Tim Ferriss quote, what if I did this backwards? What if I did this, differently? Can I teach it? Can I package it together? Can I do something? I think some really interesting stuff starts to come out when you have a little bit of experience with a little bit of thought behind what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis, with a little bit of your own creative sort of curiosity. And that's another thing is a lot of people just decide that they hate their job and that's it forever. But if you combine those three things, you start to really, I think, come up with some cool ideas that might catch with people. And plus, it's engaging for yourself too. I think that's one way to just create interest for yourself in what you're doing, regardless of the job itself or regardless of the situation you're in. If you need to create a little bit of extra, I wish I did some more of this at my first couple of jobs, to be totally frank. I was very much that person who was like, this isn't going to work. I got to move on to the next thing. But there's still some positive stuff in there. I could have probably, bit into a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I was the opposite of that. The more toxic the work environment, the more I wanted to be there. It was like the worst thing. My wife used to call me a wounded puppy. She's like, you're just like, you have PTSD from these jobs that you worked at that you stayed way too long at when they were just horrible environments. But the reality is I look back on all of them positively. Like I'll have some former coworkers call me sometimes and like start complaining. I'm just like, I don't have the same complaints. Like, yeah, was it kind of not great there? Yeah, sure. It wasn't awesome. But I learned a ton from it. And a lot of the stuff that I learned is applicable now, even if it's what not to do. So I don't really get involved in a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs do they do a better job because they had a bad experience. So it's actually a positive outcome.
So here's the difference, I think, between a lot of entrepreneurial experience versus the traditional employee experience. I feel like if you're in an employee peer group, you tend to be with your peers kind of throughout, and you're talking to your peers a lot. You see this a lot of the young sales reps who have a lot of attention on LinkedIn are often talking to other sales reps,
Yeah.
which is cool. Like, I mean, that's a skill in and of itself. I definitely don't want to bash it by any means, but it is interesting once they start speaking to people who are earlier in the career than them, people who are maybe they're imparting advice to them that is helping. If you're a couple of years behind this person, I think that's where the really good stuff starts to come out, because the stuff with your friends, that's cool. Like, it's fun. It's often funny content. It's often basically sharing memes and doing that kind of thing. And there is I get it. Like, this is how I text my friends too. But if you were to just turn around with some of that energy, some of that ability that you have maybe as a creator in general, however you're doing it, and just look back to like, who's somebody you could help. It doesn't have to be necessarily really your business, your prospect, your whole deal. It doesn't have to be that for when you're early on. But can you turn around? Can you help someone? And if you can, look back at your high school, your college, whatever it is, and if you can help somebody on the path where you might have not gotten a hand up, or you didn't get that help, A, it's a little bit fulfilling, but then B, I think it's actually genuinely starts making you look at your own career and sort of say like, oh, well, okay, this was actually really good. Let me turn this into a positive story. Or this is a negative. Can I turn it into a positive? Or, hey, this is a negative. Don't ever do this. Avoid this by all cost. So I just think it's an interesting way to break out of the peer group mentality, and because the peer group goes with you as you elevate, but the value doesn't really change. And I think that entrepreneurs, as I think we've both learned over the course of both of our careers, you very quickly have to look up and you have to look down. Yeah. And nobody else is with you on the journey really until you start to really build your team and stuff. But the up and down direction is, I think, very thick skin that you have to develop to start asking for help from up, and asking for advice, and asking very directly, learning how to get that back and how to be valuable to people, but then also look down and sort of say, hey, can I help other people? And that's where I think, in my opinion, the best ideas come from, and the best kind of moments as as you develop your career.
Yeah, it's a super interesting point I hadn't really considered. If you think about like an employee, they're constantly trying to do a good job and look like they know what they're doing, right? Because if you don't, you get fired. But then when you like start your own company, you get punished by that kind of mentality pretty quickly, because then you're acting like you know what you're doing. You don't actually know what you're doing. And because of that, the market is the one responding to you, not like your boss. Anyone could fool one person, right? They're like, how many outbound sales development companies are there? There's infinite. He's like, everybody who gets fired starts like an outbound sales development firm, and then they go out of business in like 9 months. It's kind of like funny to think about. Like, I hadn't made that connection until you said that. Like, the truth is, when you're an employee, I'm just gonna like clarify this thought. When you're an employee, you're rewarded by knowing what you're doing, and you're also rewarded by acting like you know what you're doing. Right? Ultimately, there's a result you're trying to get, but it's still like you behaving as if you know what you're doing is actually a lot more helpful than it is in like a business environment. When you're an entrepreneur and you own your company, like you really need to ask for help and learn things from other people. But if you're still stuck in that, I need to look good to everybody, then you're less likely to ask for that kind of support. You're always trying to act like. That's why I like it when people are very open about their revenue numbers and like the challenges that they're having, because like, I don't know, it shows that they actually care to get better.
I think it's also you trigger a different kind of value as well, because when you are only focused on, let's say, looking good amongst a peer group and looking good within your echo chamber, essentially, with maybe your direct manager and your, I don't know, and the team that you're on, um, there's something that comes out of that. But when you start helping people, I mean, just to be very fluffy for a second here, whether it's somebody who's, up or down, as I said before, but if you're really focused on trying to figure out how to genuinely be a value add, and I mean that really authentically, not just like a hey, add some value to somebody's life, but actually be life changing. Can you do that? And if you can, that's the stuff that I think is eventually career changing for you, life changing for you. I think that's the stuff where people start to get really self confident, not just the bravado stuff where it's like, oh, I'm the best on my team, but no, I have something to say. I have a point of view. I have there's a great consultant coach out there called Philip Morgan, who is a positioning coach and stuff, and he has the whole thing about point of view, and how most people, including entrepreneurs, for most of their careers, never develop a strong point of view. And once you start getting, I guess, comfortable in the discomfort and leaning into what your opinions are, what's your thoughts on, what do you love about the sales world? What do you hate about the sales world? How would you build a company? How would you manage somebody? How would you do, instead of just looking at, pain points from your past, for example, and just saying, oh, that sucked. I hate that person. It's a very transformative experience, I think, for you as a person, but also in your career, also, I guess, in your content, if you really want to pull it back to that. But I think it's I don't know about you, but I've also met people who are stuck in one industry and have been very kind of coddled throughout it. And I mean, I'm thinking about, unfortunately, a lot of my friends from back in college days. They're very trapped in two or three industries, and they're just not interesting people. They're really not. Some of them have good careers. That's fine, but they don't have anything to say, really. And the ones that have been through a little bit of the proverbial shit. I don't know. There's much more, I don't know, life behind their eyes, and a lot more interesting, I think, frameworks and stuff that they apply that I always get interested in whenever I find somebody like that.
Yeah, well, the idea of just giving to people who are for like behind you, I think is a really powerful one. Like I'll tell a quick story about this. I have a friend of mine, you know who this is, Dan, but I'm going to anonymize it. I have a friend of mine who is very well known in like the kind of the business, SaaS world and stuff. Very well known. I would call him a celebrity, and really high level. Like if you like just to work with this guy, it's a fortune. Like if you want to work with him privately, it's a fortune. And he's a friend, but we're not like best friends. We didn't grow up together. Like I know him through somebody else, and he asked me to do some stuff for him. Like I mean, we have a friendship, but it's not like we're hanging out on the weekends. Anyway, I had to make a really difficult decision. This is several months ago. I had to make a really difficult decision at one point. I didn't really know what to do, and I was a little worried about it. So I texted him. The guy called me back in like 30 seconds. He just called me. I was like, oh, geez. So I like answered the phone, and he was in the middle of working out and gave me great advice. Great advice. Like, this is like you would pay to have this kind of conversation with him. He just called me right back, gave me great advice, and didn't expect anything in return. All right, cool. Talk to you later or whatever. That was really cool. And I remember even thinking like, gosh, it was like very cool of him to take, whatever it was, 10 minutes out of his day to have a quick conversation with me, to walk me through like this decision I had to make and like how I should go about doing it. very little effort on his part, but it provided a ton of value to me. And I'll always remember that. I'll always do whatever I can. And like I do, I try to do whatever I can to provide value back because of how much he helped me. That happens. And maybe at first, when you're early on in your entrepreneurial journey, you don't have a lot to give back because you're still kind of learning. But as you keep developing, you end up, yeah, you do have a lot to give back. I'm at the point in my career where I know a lot about a specific topic that even somebody who's further along with me, they might not know as much about. And all of a sudden, I'm much more valuable to them. But the fact that somebody is willing to give, even though they're not expecting that kind of value in return, is a really special thing. I think if more people did that, we'd be in a better spot.
I totally agree, and you did provide a ton of value before that conversation too. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. But the idea that I just said peer groups, and maybe that's the wrong way to think about it. But if you actively, this is going to sound potentially fluffy, but it's something I believe. If you actively surround yourself with people who are like that, who are of different skill sets, different maybe on very different paths, but who are potential big value adds to you, where you can also be a big value add to them. I used to do this back when I was in my mid-20s, when I was living in Jordan. I did my best to basically be the connector in my groups. And, I'm one of those floaty people where I'm friends with everybody, but I'm only going to go out in different groups here and there. But I would actively start picking out people where, hey, Kyle, you got to go meet this guy over here. And then I'm going to bring out one more person. I was kept it very small, like, 3 or 4 people tops, but who did not know each other. And then I'd go, eventually I started renting out the cigar room in one of the hotels and having these nice little meetups.
That's
but
fun.
The idea that, can you break down, I don't know, maybe some relationships that normally would not happen if you were just passive about it? And can you just actively start breaking down some barriers and being valuable and being helpful? I think even if you're an introvert, even if you're not, the most outgoing person, it's still such a valuable activity that you can be doing. And you can, when my first business failed, I immediately started going off and looking for the best entrepreneurs around me and just asking them, hey, can I work for you? And just off the back of that, I had some wonderful friendships that came out of that. Not just, some good, value that I could extract and some good training that I got, but it was some really, really good experience where, I still, I had a tough moment in my life at one point when I was in my very late 20s, but I went back and sent an email to one of those guys. The guy he didn't have to take the time to do anything for me, but same thing, man. He gave me a call, and it left me in tears at the end. It was a really emotional thing, and I felt like I had a lifelong friend that I could really tap on. And you don't get those relationships out of nowhere. They don't just happen. I don't think they just fall into your lap. I think you have to go out and sort of create them a little bit for yourself. And if you do, you got some awesome people just waiting they want to help you. They want to be there. They want to be, but sometimes they don't know who you are. You know what I mean? And who you are, not just by name, but who are you? What do you do? What's your thing that you can, where do you fit in my world here? But anyway, yeah, I think it's an interesting point of how we build our social circles and then how they also fit in with our own development, I guess.
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point. Like, find a network of other founders that you can meet with regularly. Like, I can't. One of the things I did a while ago with Jason Bay and Marcus Chan, if you guys follow them, they're great. I created like a little networking group with them. I forget whose idea it was, but like we were chatting. We're like, hey, why don't we meet regularly and do this thing? And every quarter we meet. So we don't even meet that often. Some people do this monthly, which I think is probably better, but I meet with them every single quarter. And our companies are roughly the same size. They're similar companies too. We're not really direct competitors, but like we have similar companies, similar offers. And it's just been really nice every single quarter, sit down with the same 2 other people and just talk about how last quarter was, what our plans are for this quarter, some challenges we're running into. Maybe they've solved the challenges already, or maybe they haven't. Like I was just talking to Jason's wife about the 401k plan. Like, that's so random, but they had no one to talk to about it. But I happen to know about it, right? And he's a friend. I think that kind of stuff is really, really useful, and I always get a little boost of energy every time I come off of one of those calls.
Dude, you know how many best friends I know who are direct competitors with each other, who are who are they're founders of I have one of my close friends, his best friend is his very direct competitor. They're both in the cement business, but the idea of how same thing happened in the beer industry. I saw this happen quite a few times actually, where you know the struggles of what the other person's going through, but maybe you felt too shy to ask or too shy to whatever. But if
Right.
you do, and maybe it's a little socially awkward, I don't know. But if you do ask those questions, who else in the world is going to know the path that you've been on than another entrepreneur, especially in the same space? I think it's a very interesting thing to sort of consider. Maybe looking around you a little bit too and see, is there somebody that has some good answers for you, but you've maybe felt, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't broach the subject, or maybe I shouldn't, whatever. Try it out. Maybe it'll be healthy. Maybe it'll be good for you.
Yeah, I love that.
So
What should we end with here,
maybe,
Dan?
what should we end with?
Maybe a song,
Um,
or what do you think?
Little song and dance. Well, I did post a very good picture of you. I reposted the picture you posted of yourself, the AI tool that decided that you were a country singer.
That was ridiculous.
So I thought it looked beautiful, man. I thought that was maybe a good direction for you.
They give you 5 options. So just for those of you who don't know, there's this trend going around where people are using an app, giving them some pictures, and the AI, I guess, is generating lookalikes of you. So I was like, I could use some lookalikes. So I sent in a bunch of pictures and just awaited for the arrival of these great photographs. Everyone's looks awesome, by the way. Everyone who posts about them looks awesome. So they give you 5 options, and the first one was trash. Like, I just keep kind of going through them, and I get to option number 4, and it's literally me holding a guitar just out of nowhere. And I was like, "Hey, make me some professional looking photos," and it just gave me a guitar randomly. It's one of the funniest pictures. I was laughing. I was on the floor laughing. It was so funny.
That's hilarious. Yeah, that's I'll link to a little AI generated country song that we put together, and in the comments below, or in the description. But other than that, I guess good seeing you, Kyle. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon.
All right, take care, everybody. See ya.